I never thought that paying off someone's debt would destroy everything I believed about family. My name is Carla. I am 28, and I really believe that doing something nice would bring us closer, not push us to a place we did not know how to leave. I had quietly paid a $25,000 debt for my sister because I wanted her to feel less stress for once in her life, and I wanted her birthday to feel like a new beginning after months of worry that she tried to hide behind fake laughs and tired smiles. I expected her to be confused when she found out, but I never expected her voice to get so loud that the whole hallway felt too small for both of us. And I definitely never expected her to yell the words that still play in my head whenever I think about that day. She looked right at me and said, "Why did you think you had the right to mess with my life like that?" Her anger was so strong that I could barely say anything before she told me to stop every payment right away. I agreed because I thought backing off would calm everything down, but the quiet that came after did not fix anything. 2 days later, she posted on Facebook that I was a selfish person who pretended to be nice just to get attention. And reading those words made me feel like the ground under me had moved in a way I could not stop. I realized that this was no longer just a mix-up, but something bigger that I had never seen coming. If you want to know what happened after that first fight and why everything got worse, stay with me and share your thoughts below. Before anything broke apart, my family in Charleston still held on to a weak kind of peace that made every fight feel like something we could fix someday. My parents worked hard to keep our home steady, and even though we were not perfect, there was a plan that helped us get through life without making big problems over small things. Mom usually tried to smooth out problems before they got worse, while Dad handled fights with a quiet strength that kept everyone under control. Things only changed whenever my sister Brenda pushed past what felt fair, because she had always had a strong sense of independence that clashed with the way our parents liked to solve problems. I often looked up to her confidence, but struggled with the sharp way she acted whenever someone said she might need help with anything she thought was personal. Growing up with Brenda taught me that our differences were not because of jealousy or anger, but because of the completely different paths we made for ourselves as adults. I learned to handle things by thinking many steps ahead, while she relied heavily on feeling and emotion, which led her into situations that tired her out long before she realized how much stress she was carrying. That difference shaped almost every talk we had, and even though we both cared about each other, we saw responsibility in opposite ways. The stress between us stayed quiet during family dinners or holiday gatherings, but we still managed to stay close enough to avoid getting into open fights. Brenda's money trouble started after a bunch of doctor visits that left her buried in bills she struggled to handle with her unsteady work schedule. She tried to hide the problem because she believed that taking help meant saying she failed, and she refused to let anyone think she was losing control of her life. When I found out the truth, she said that everything was handled. But the tired look in her eyes said something else, and I never blamed her for the situation because I knew how expensive health care could be in our country, especially for someone who tried to balance many part-time jobs without steady insurance. The big change came during a week when Charleston's sticky weather seemed to match the heavy feeling in our home. Brenda got a letter saying that her unpaid bill would stop her from getting an apartment she had been planning to move into, which made her panic in a way she could not hide despite her best tries. She tried to tell everyone that the letter was just a mistake, but I watched her hands shake whenever she opened another envelope from the billing office. And right then, I realized the situation was way more serious than she wanted us to believe. Mom tried to comfort her by saying she could wait to move, but Brenda said no because she believed it would make her look unreliable to the apartment office and to anyone who knew about her situation. I stood nearby while she talked, and each sentence she forced out showed a deeper level of worry than she had ever shared openly with anyone in our family. The weight she carried stretched across her voice, and it became clear that she had hit her limit long before she admitted it. Watching her struggle pulled at something in me that I could not ignore. Even though I knew my tries to help might start another fight based on the same pattern we had repeated throughout our lives. The idea of stepping in grew slowly but strongly. And even though I paused, the picture of her trying to handle everything alone pushed me closer to a choice I was not fully ready to make. I wanted to protect her from falling under stress that she never should have faced completely on her own. 1 week later, I made the choice to look into Brenda's debt on my own because something inside me refused to ignore the growing feeling that her situation was far worse than I had first thought. I waited until a morning when I knew Brenda would be working a long shift because I needed time to call the money office without stops or questions that might show what I planned to do. The building listed on her letters was in an older part of Charleston, so I called instead of going there in person to avoid raising any worry that might reach her through someone who knew our last name. I spoke clearly when I said who I was, and the worker on the line asked several check questions that made my stomach feel tight with guilt, even though my reasons came from a place of real care. Once the information matched what they had on file, the worker pulled up the account summary with a voice that had no blame, but the details she described made it clear that Brenda had hidden the emotional and money stress more than I expected. The balance was much higher than the number Brenda had casually said during a talk that seemed harmless at the time, and the late notices went back further than any of us knew. I listened while the worker explained how the interest grew and turned an already heavy bill into something that could mess up her stability for years. My heart beat faster because I pictured Brenda trying to face this problem alone, and I felt sadness mixed with frustration since she always said she had everything under control. The worker asked if I wanted to schedule a full breakdown of the charges, and I agreed because knowing the truth felt needed if I wanted to make any choice that would actually help her instead of making things worse. During that talk, I learned how fast medical debt could grow when left alone, especially for someone without good insurance. Brenda had been doing her best to chip away at the balance, but the payments she made barely touched the interest that piled up each month. The worker said that Brenda could get a short-term reduction if a partial lump sum was sent in within a certain time frame, and hearing that choice planted the first seed of action in my mind. I knew that stepping into the situation without her permission crossed a delicate line, but leaving her to drown in something she could not handle alone felt just as wrong. I wrestled with that fight while the worker waited patiently on the other end, not knowing the emotional storm growing inside me. Finally, I asked the worker to give me a moment, and I muted the call while I tried to picture what would happen with both choices. If I stayed out of it, Brenda would keep struggling while pretending she was fine. If I stepped in, even quietly, she might blame me for invading her privacy. I held the phone tightly while trying to steady my breath, and after several long seconds, the decision came up in a way that felt both certain and scary. I unmuted the line and asked for information about sending in a secret partial payment that would not tell the account holder until the processing was done. The worker explained the steps with careful detail, and I followed each instruction while reminding myself that I was doing this because I loved my sister more than she knew. When the payment went through, a deep stillness came over me. Even though a faint worry stayed beneath the relief, I decided that I would not tell Mom or Dad because I did not want to involve them in something that could cause unnecessary fighting, especially when they already felt overwhelmed with their own jobs. The choice to hide my part felt heavy, but I believe it would stop fights that might make the situation even more painful for everyone. After ending the call, I sat quietly with the knowledge of what I had done, hoping it would bring Brenda a little peace, even if she never found out the truth. That Friday afternoon changed with a sudden shift that caught me unprepared, creating a stress I felt right away inside my chest as I tried to finish a few tasks at home. About an hour after lunch, Brenda got an automatic alert from her bank about the recent payment on her debt. And the moment she saw the transaction ID, she must have realized that no one else in the family would have stepped in without telling her. I was in the kitchen when she stormed into the house with her phone already in her hand, her face sharp enough to make my stomach feel tight before a single word left her mouth. She did not wait for me to look up before saying, "Did you seriously do this behind my back?" which sent a shock straight through me, because she had never come at me with that level of anger. I tried to answer, but she cut me off while waving the notification toward my face as if it were a piece of proof in a courtroom. When I finally got to speak, I said, "I thought it would help you breathe a little easier," hoping she would see that the action came from worry rather than blame. Instead of softening, she stepped closer and asked, "Do you think I'm such a burden that you had to do this for me?" Her voice carried a sharp edge that made me freeze for a second while I tried to understand how my plan had twisted so far from the result. I reached for the counter behind me because my hands had started to shake, and I told her, "I only wanted to ease some pressure for you," but her face got even harder as soon as the words left my mouth. She blamed me for crossing a line she believed should never be touched, and the frustration in her voice rose as she said I had embarrassed her by making her look irresponsible. Each sentence pushed the fight further away from any chance of understanding, and I watched the situation spin while looking for a way to slow it down. She talked about privacy, control, pride, and the fear of others finding out. Even though I had not shared the information with anyone, her voice rose again as she said that I had no right to handle her problems, even if I thought the reason was kind. I wanted to explain the thinking behind my choice, but every try only made her angrier. She said again that I had humiliated her, and hearing the word humiliated drained the last bit of certainty I had left. At one point, she stepped back as if to create distance that matched the emotional gap between us. I tried to stay calm, but her blames came too fast for me to defend myself. Each time I opened my mouth, she talked over me with another reason why my choice had been unforgivable. Finally, she told me to cancel every pending payment right away, and her voice made it clear that she would not accept a single exception. I paused because I knew how much the debt had weighed on her, but the anger in her voice left me little room to talk about anything. The more I looked at her, the more I understood that fighting would only make the damage between us worse. My hands felt cold as I agreed to stop the payment, and I told her I would contact the money office later that evening. The moment I gave my agreement, she turned away without offering even a second look, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the whole fight. I stayed in the kitchen long after she left, trying to process how something meant to take away her burden had become the reason for a break I could not fix. The house felt unusually still after the chaos, and I stood there wondering how quickly good plans could turn into fighting when trust no longer lived in the same place for both people. 2 days after the fight, the situation exploded again in a way I could never have guessed, creating a new wave of stress that spread far beyond the walls of our home. Early that morning, I woke up to several notifications on my phone because friends had started sending screenshots of a Facebook post from Brenda. She had written, "I have a sister who is stingy but desperate to play the hero in front of everyone," and the sentence felt like a punch to the chest when I saw it shown so publicly. The words sat on the screen with a weight that made it hard for me to breathe, especially because she had shown the situation as if I had tried to embarrass her for fun. The post spread fast since Brenda had a wide circle of coworkers and neighbors who liked to comment on everything she shared, and within minutes, people started adding their opinions without knowing a single part of what had actually happened. Several comments said that I had acted to get attention, while others hinted that Brenda had suffered because of my supposed need for control. Reading those messages felt unreal because the story had twisted into something I did not recognize, shaped completely by the version Brenda had chosen to tell. I tried to calm myself enough to think clearly, but it got harder when I realized that some people commenting were people living in our neighborhood. The idea that strangers had started judging me without ever hearing my side hit a nerve that I struggled to steady. When Mom saw the post, she right away sided with Brenda because Brenda had talked to her before uploading it. She believed Brenda's version of a story and said again that I should have respected boundaries, no matter how stressful the debt had been. Mom said that my choice to act alone had proven that I did everything according to my own thinking instead of listening to the family, and hearing that from her cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Dad read the post too, but he chose not to comment or step in because he feared the fight would get worse if he said even a small disagreement. His silence created a strange stress that settled between all three of us, and I could sense his discomfort each time he looked at me during those 2 days. In the middle of that emotional mess, my closest friend showed up at my apartment after noticing that I had stopped replying to messages. She had known me long enough to know when something had shaken me at a deeper level. And even though she appeared only this once in the whole series of events, her presence helped steady my thoughts. She listened quietly while I explained what had happened, and she reminded me that plan and action often separate when people project fear or pride onto the situation. Her voice allowed the fog inside my mind to settle just enough for me to see the bigger picture without drowning in frustration. Later that evening, I got a message from my Aunt Rachel, who had heard about the incident through other relatives. She told me that Brenda had been retelling the story in a way that suggested I wanted control over her money. Rachel explained that several family members had started repeating Brenda's version because they thought it came directly from the source. She added that she reached out because she knew something felt off, and she wanted to understand my side before anyone else made quick judgments. Reading her message created a strange mix of relief and sadness because someone had finally questioned the story. Even though Brenda had clearly shaped what people believe before I had the chance to speak, I spent the rest of the night trying to process the layers of misunderstanding that had formed around me. The weight of being shown wrong publicly felt heavier than the fight itself, and I could not shake the realization that Brenda had chosen to shift blame rather than face her own fear. As the evening got quieter, I started to understand that the damage now reached far beyond our private fight, and fixing it might no longer be possible. By the end of the week, the weight of everything unsaid finally broke open in a way that pushed all of us into a fight none of us had prepared for. The start of it came through an unexpected email from the money company telling me that the account connected to Brenda's loan had been flagged for possible loss of extension privileges because of a sudden stop in the repayment schedule. The message included a formal notice saying that their system had recorded a sudden cancellation request sent in shortly after my payment had been reversed, and they stressed that such stops placed the borrower at risk of penalties. Reading the message filled me with an uneasy chill because the results were far more serious than Brenda had admitted during our fight. I paused before forwarding the email to Brenda, since I wanted to make sure she would understand the urgency without thinking I planned to interfere again. Within minutes, she called me with a harsh voice and said, "You ruined everything. You think you help, but you just make my life worse." Her words landed with a sharpness that felt almost practiced, and it became clear that she had already decided I was the cause of every problem around the loan. I tried to explain what the money company had reported, but she cut me off before I could finish, leaving a choking silence hanging between us until she ended the call without another word. Later that evening, Mom told me that the family had decided to gather the next day because she believed the situation had turned into something that needed clarity. Her voice sounded worn, and I sensed she felt trapped between loyalty to Brenda and the heavy confusion created by everything that had happened online. Dad stayed quiet during the phone call, though I could hear him moving in the background, which told me he was getting ready for a talk he had hoped to avoid. The next afternoon, we met in the living room, where the air felt tight enough to make breathing hard. The stress rose even higher when Rachel arrived carrying a small folder that she rested on the table before anyone spoke. Brenda sat with her arms crossed, refusing to meet my eyes, while Mom looked between us with a mix of worry and tiredness. Dad stayed near the doorway, as if he needed a way out should the fight go beyond control. Rachel opened the folder, slowly showing several printed screenshots taken from Brenda's Facebook post along with notification logs from earlier repayment cycles that showed I had completed multiple payments before the fight. She placed the papers in front of Mom and Dad, then asked them to read everything before reacting. Brenda shifted uncomfortably, but stayed silent while the room absorbed the truth. Mom's face tightened as she read, because the difference between Brenda's blames and the recorded facts became impossible to ignore. Dad breathed out with a quiet heaviness when he realized Brenda had twisted the situation far more than any of us suspected. When Mom finally spoke, her voice shook as she asked Brenda why she had twisted the story instead of telling them the full truth. Brenda avoided her look and muttered something about feeling humiliated. But Mom did not accept that explanation because the damage reached beyond embarrassment. Dad stepped forward with a steady voice and said that trust within a family relied on honesty, not on rewriting events to protect one person's pride. Brenda stood up suddenly, grabbed her purse, and walked out without offering a single apology or explanation. The room fell silent after the door closed, leaving the rest of us staring at the evidence on the table, each of us realizing that the break had grown far deeper than any misunderstanding. The weeks that followed showed how wide the distance between us had grown, and it became clear that my tries to restore even the smallest connection had no effect on Brenda. She avoided every call, ignored every message, and acted as if any form of communication from me carried a weight she no longer wished to carry. The silence did not feel temporary, because it held a heaviness that suggested she had chosen a path where I no longer had a place. She also kept her distance from Mom and Dad, which created an uncomfortable stress in the family, as if she believed stepping away would protect her from any result tied to the choices she had made. I could sense the disappointment in Mom each time she checked her phone, hoping for a message that never came. The credit company added to the strain when they sent an update about the overdue balance that Brenda had insisted on handling alone. The notice said that the missed payments caused a big drop in her credit score, a problem that would follow her for years if she did not fix it soon. I read the details twice before placing the letter back on my table, realizing how fast her situation had changed after she forced me to stop the payment plan. Brenda refused to share anything directly with us, but small pieces of information reached me through automatic updates tied to my earlier involvement. Each update showed how the results of her choice grew heavier. A few days later, I overheard Mom telling Dad that Brenda had been denied her application for a new apartment. The landlord had looked at her credit history and said no to the request without offering her a chance to explain. Mom's voice softened with worry, while Dad responded with a quiet acceptance that made the room feel colder. I did not join their talk because I sensed that both of them were still trying to make sense of the break within our family. The rejection added another layer to Brenda's struggles, but she kept moving further away from all of us instead of asking for support. Her friends started to fade from her life as well, though for reasons separate from our family fighting. A former coworker told Mom that several people in Brenda's circle had realized she had twisted the truth in earlier talks. They learned she had shaped every story to fit whatever picture she wanted others to believe, even when it required shifting blame onto people who had tried to help her. Once her lies showed up, they stepped back to avoid being pulled into the chaos that followed her. I did not celebrate this change because it only showed how alone she had become, and being alone rarely leads to clarity. One evening, I sat with Mom in the kitchen after she asked if we could talk privately. She made tea and waited for me to gather my thoughts, then asked how I felt about the widening gap between Brenda and me. I admitted that the wound had grown too deep for me to keep pretending that everything would someday go back to normal. I told her I needed distance because the hurt I carried had settled into something I could no longer dismiss. Mom listened without stopping, her eyes showing a mix of sadness and acceptance. She knew I had reached a point where protecting my own peace mattered more than chasing a fix that Brenda clearly did not want. Dad entered the kitchen a short time later. He did not say much, but the look on his face showed that he understood more than he let on. The three of us stayed together in a quiet stillness that said more than words could. Right then, it became clear that Brenda would have to face the results of her choices on her own terms. No one could protect her from the reality she had created, not even the people who once tried the hardest to support her. A gentle sense of steadiness returned as I stepped into the following months, giving me the clarity I had been missing for far too long. I put that calm into repairing the pieces of my routine, and I allowed myself to breathe in a way that felt honest rather than forced. Those quiet shifts helped me take back a part of my identity that had been shadowed by the chaos with Brenda. I refocused on my work in Charleston and committed to protecting my mental well-being with a seriousness I should have used earlier. I created stronger boundaries around my time and stopped changing my schedule to fit emotional storms that were never mine to handle. I started therapy again, not because I felt broken, but because I wanted a space where I could process the tangled mix of guilt, sadness, and tiredness that had built up during those hard weeks. Each session reminded me that I had the right to step back from relationships that kept draining me without offering any real connection in return. During that time, Mom reached out with a realness that surprised me. She said sorry for thinking the worst and admitted that she had let Brenda's version of events shape her reactions. She listened without stopping and asked what support would actually help rather than deciding it for me. That change in attitude softened something inside me, and I found myself opening up to her with a level of comfort I had not felt since I was young. Dad stayed steady through it all, choosing quiet understanding instead of forcing us to make up. Their presence made it easier for me to rebuild my footing, and I appreciated their effort to see the situation through a balanced view. Despite their encouragement, I made a careful choice not to reach out to Brenda. The distance between us had grown in ways that no quick talk could repair. I accepted that being willing to help did not promise thankfulness, and good plans could not erase the damage caused by repeated misreadings. I stopped checking whether she would reach out, and I stopped replaying our fights in my head. That acceptance created a powerful sense of peace I had not felt in years. As the weeks went on, I started focusing on healthier connections. I spent more evenings with coworkers who valued mutual respect, and I reconnected with friends who showed real interest in my well-being. I joined a community class that encouraged creativity rather than work, and the slow pace of those gatherings helped me ground myself. Those simple experiences reminded me that life felt fuller when I stopped carrying relationships that refused to meet me halfway. Mom and Dad stayed present, sometimes updating me on family matters without pressuring me to fix anything with Brenda. I appreciated their holding back because it showed that they finally understood the importance of emotional boundaries. They encouraged me to move forward without anger, and they supported my choice to put stability over duty. Their steadiness helped me strengthen my trust in them, and that trust became one of the most meaningful results of everything that had happened. By the end of those months, I realized that healing did not always require making up. Sometimes the most caring choice was to accept the distance and protect the space that allowed you to grow. I carried that truth with me every single day, and it shaped the way I handled every choice that followed. My life became stable not because the fighting disappeared, but because I stopped letting it control my direction. I learned that kindness becomes harmful when it crosses boundaries that were never mine to cross. Even the most generous plans can create trouble when they ignore another person's sense of independence. I discovered that emotional responsibility is something each person must carry for themselves, and support only works when it is invited rather than forced. Respecting limits does not lessen care, and keeping distance can be the healthiest form of protection. Thank you for staying with me through this story and giving your time to understand the complicated layers behind family fighting. Your presence means more than you know, and I truly appreciate every listener who looks at these moments with care. I hope you share your thoughts on how you would handle a situation like this, because your view might help someone facing the same struggle.